compassionate support from others helps me feel less alone. Abby, having more compassion for myself absolutely impacts my resiliency in the sense that it helps me to not give up on myself and be disappointed with myself and my abilities. It gives me the courage to try again. Awesome. Thanks, Abby. Another one, when others are more forgiving and understanding, I tend to not be so hard on myself and can move forward instead of dwelling on mistakes. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think what an interesting concept that is when sometimes other people offer the compassion, we feel more able to give compassion to ourselves. Like we need that approval, like, yeah, go ahead, give yourself that compassion. Crystal, healthy compassion. It allows me to see past my hurt and be empathetic towards others. Unhealthy compassion causes me to not value my voice, be critical, and share my hurt. The first causes me to stay motivated. The second causes fatigue and a desire to not care for others. Thank you, Crystal. And that's an interesting concept too, to thinking about it in healthy compassion and unhealthy compassion, because there definitely is a level of unhealthy compassion. And I think that we have the risk of that a lot more working in higher ed with students, and the compassion we're trying to give to students to either provide them resources or support, and how that can take it to an unhealthy level. Sometimes you give too much of yourself because you care so much. Carla, having compassion reminds me to be humble and forgiving. Awesome.
Good morning, Ashley. Can you hear me okay?
Good morning. Yes.
Good morning, everyone.
We've
Just
got
making sure everything is...
quite a few people popping in the chat today, and those who are just logging on, we've asked the question, how does compassion impact your resilience? Great responses here. Sophia just chiming in, compassion is a big help in your resilience for yourself and others in so many ways, in so many facets of our lives, that positiveness or negativity, but most definitely compassion is big. We've had some talks here about kind of compassionate support from others really helps feel less alone and resilient. Having more compassion for yourself gives you that more resiliency so that you're not disappointed in yourself and gives you courage. We talked about how when others give us compassion, sometimes we feel more able to give it to ourselves. We kind of discussed a little bit about healthy compassion and unhealthy compassion, and that there is kind of a difference between the two and how that can affect us, especially in such a, in your terms, like level 4, right? It's such a level 4 that we do, that unhealthy compassion can exist there for sure. Just really great responses this morning. I can't believe it's our last session of this series.
I know, and we're going to learn how compassion actually does contribute to resilience. So all great questions this morning and responses. And I know folks are still going to be jumping on, but I'd kind of like to dive right in this morning because we have a lot of ground to cover. And I'm just so, it's kind of bittersweet to have this be the last one, because even though I haven't gotten to talk with even remotely all of you, I've had some folks reach out independently, which has just been so amazing to get to talk to some folks, and just again being able to see all these names and faces on the screen every week from the last 5 weeks has just been really empowering. And I want us all to think for a moment about the ripple effect that this can have by you taking time out once a week for the last 5 weeks to show up here and do this work for yourself. That's going to have a ripple effect out beyond you. So I really want to acknowledge and appreciate that for each and every one of you. And I also, it's backwards. I thought Zoom would display it the right way. I had to wear my favorite t-shirt for the last day, which says highly meditated. So that's how I'm feeling today. It's pretty highly meditated. So let me share my screen here. And as Ashley was kind of warming you all up, we are here today to talk about compassion. And this is where the rubber hits the road. I have, for the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks, been talking mainly about the awareness piece and kind of weaving in compassion here and there and saying, we'll talk about compassion later. We do a little bit of compassion practice when we do the RAIN practice from the mindfulness of emotions talk. And if you recall back to the very first talk, I mentioned, and I've mentioned a couple times since then, that mindfulness really has these two wings, the awareness wing and the compassion wing. And we are finally really getting into the compassion wing. So I really hope that this is the hope that I have for all of you today is that this talk, even when you just plant the seeds for it to grow, to cultivate more compassion, it can really be a game changer for yourself and for other people. So, just starting with the overview, we're going to do follow up, but instead of doing follow up from last week, if you have questions or things you want to share about last week, we can hold those off to the end. The follow up I want to do is actually some questions that Ashley sent me that folks had submitted at the very beginning of the course, I think when they were signing up for the course. And there's some really beautiful, amazing questions in here that I want to make sure we answer. So we're going to spend a little time at the beginning doing that. And then we'll have a couple poll questions and we'll do a brief grounding practice today. And then really dive into compassion and recognizing that compassion really is our true nature, and learning about some of the basics on kindness and compassion, as well as the benefits and barriers to compassion for both ourselves and others. And of course, then we will talk about how you can practice compassion and do our formal compassion practice before we wrap up at the end. So this is a doozy. So, we got to put on the big girl, big boy boots today. You got to strap in. Let's giddy up, basically, because this is probably my favorite topic in this introduction course. So the follow-up questions that I wanted to turn to and provide some answers as best as I can understand the questions. And I think these questions will be helpful for all of us in understanding the answers. There were two questions that came up initially about how to use mindfulness to help with depression, and how might mindfulness be a strategy for someone's 15-year-old son to better manage anxiety, which I think is a broader question about how mindfulness can help with both anxiety and depression. And I want to hearken back to the RAIN practice, first of all, that we talked about in the mindfulness of emotions. Oftentimes with anxiety and depression, in my experience and in talking with other people, there's also so much self-judgment. And when we can bring that RAIN practice, remember, recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. We can bring that RAIN practice, even in the moment, to feelings of anxiety, depression, sadness, whatever emotions are coming up for you. And so if you or someone you know is struggling with anxiety or depression, first of all, recognizing if there might be some deeper support that someone could benefit from, like counseling or a support group. And in addition to that, bringing that RAIN practice into those emotions of anxiety and depression that you're having, recognizing that the goal is not to push away or stuff down the anxiety or depression. It's to bring the awareness and the nurturing to it, to see if we can allow it to be there and recognize that in the body, even that depression or sadness changes into something else. Even when it feels like the entire body aches from depression or anxiety. Even within the whole body, there will be spaces where there's something else. And so I encourage that continued practice of the RAIN practice to help with those. And in addition, the compassion, especially self-compassion that we'll be talking about today, can help with that also. So I'll try and keep that in mind as we're going through this to be able to point that out. Another question was, how do I incorporate mindfulness in crucial emotional conversations with coworkers, family, and friends? I just gave a talk the other day on mindful communication. And this might actually be something that would be included in sort of a next level mindfulness course. But I'll give you sort of the 2-minute crash course on it now. When we are, especially in these times that we're in right now, when so many of us are having conversations around race, we're having conversations around how to best care for our kids in school, how to care for people who are sick. I mean, we're having a lot of difficult conversations right now. And my invitation is that when you are entering or find yourself in any conversation, to recognize that meaningful communication really begins with being a good listener. And so when you can, as Rumi says it, I think he has a quote, something like, listen with tolerance, or listen with ears of tolerance. So oftentimes as the listener, we are caught up in what are we going to say next, or trying to interpret what the person is saying, or caught up in judgments about the person and what they're saying, or maybe judgments about ourselves because of how we're reacting to the person. We're doing everything but listening. So if you can begin in those difficult conversations to get comfortable being the listener and starting to be curious about what's the intent behind the words, not to make assumptions, but as we'll learn in the compassion talk today, to learn how to cultivate some empathy, which is understandably might trip some of you up, but to cultivate some empathy for the other person by going behind the words that they're saying to see what their intention might be. Are they speaking from a place of fear or anger or lack of understanding? And if they're speaking from a place like that, what are some times when you've maybe spoken from a similar place? And by doing that, we can start to create a connection with the other person through that empathy, through that shared experience of a particular emotion or feeling. And then we can start to connect. And then when we go to speak, a really helpful acronym to remember, I love the acronyms, is WAIT. Why am I talking? So then you go behind the words you are going to speak to what is my intention for what I'm about to say. So again, it's creating awareness. It's that first wing, and also cultivating some compassion for the other person and yourself. So that's a real quick crash course in mindful communication, which could be a whole topic in and of itself. So just remembering when you go into these difficult conversations, or when you find yourself in a difficult conversation, connect in, ground in to the present moment, really listen for the intention behind the words, and then wait, why am I talking, before you speak? Beautiful question. Another one is how to create space to practice mindfulness physically and emotionally while our schedules are packed with professional and personal activities. As I said in the very first lecture, and I know this keeps coming up for folks, is mindfulness is a way of life. It's not just 5, 10, or 20 minutes in a chair on a cushion. It's a way of life. So my question to anyone who is having this question come up for them is to think about, how can I find moments of mindfulness in my life? And how can I be more mindful of the activities I'm engaging in during the day? Because we tend to fill up our time. We can fill up our time pretty easy. And we can also create more time, even if it's just a minute. So challenging yourself to see, where can I find more moments of mindfulness in my day if I can't sit for 5 or 10 or 20 minutes in a formal practice? how can I start to weave mindfulness in through the day? There were another couple of similar questions. What mindfulness practices can be incorporated in work settings and during and in between meetings? And also a question I found similar, what are some mindful resilience activities that I can implement in the classroom? Both of these are talking about bringing mindfulness into group settings, into meetings, into classrooms. And a few quick techniques I have are just grounding, especially in a classroom with kids. If you can bring kids in and have them just do grounding like we do for a couple of minutes to connect in, feel their feet on the floor, do that first. Or for yourself, if you're going into a meeting, unless you think everybody in the meeting would be into doing a grounding practice, which why not throw that out there, see what they say. But for yourself, you can also do some grounding before you go into your meeting or during the meeting. Always checking in with the breath, checking in with the body. So grounding is one. The weight that I just mentioned is also another one that, especially in classrooms with kids, or even honestly in meetings with adults, to encourage people to say, hey, I learned about this thing. Let's all try it on today. It's called wait. Why am I talking? Taking a moment to everybody before they speak, kind of ask that of themselves. And also remember, I think back to the second talk, I think it was the second talk, I've lost track. There was the stop technique, which is the slow your roll, take a moment to observe what's going on, take a moment, observe, and then pause and proceed. And of course, there's the 2 feet, 1 breath, which is also great, I think, for kids and for yourself whenever you're in a group setting or meeting, is just noticing one foot and the other foot and taking a breath to ground yourself in. Another question, which I just found so compelling, is how do I encourage my friends and coworkers to take their mental health while working from home more seriously? And my answer to that, and what I've truly found in my experience from both as a mindfulness teacher, as a coach, as someone who's always kind of asking questions, being on a journey. Also, I'm somebody who's plant-based and have been for a decade. The one thing I've learned is that preaching does not work. The best thing we can do is to lead by example, because I cannot tell you how many times I've had people come to me and say, hey, I noticed you've been doing this. I really like to know more. I'd really like to know how you do it. People are watching. People are always watching. And there's a beautiful quote actually by Mahatma Gandhi that said, an ounce of practice is worth more than tons of preaching. So walk the talk, be your best example, and people will watch and want to follow you. There was a question about whether there's some in-depth information on overworking mindsets from, while we're working at home and making adjustments and all the impacts to mental health. And let's see if there's anything else related to that. Oh, there's also another question related to that. What are techniques to bring full balance, home, family, work, triggers, etc.? This notion of our overworking mindsets and kind of being on all the time now since we're at home, and trying to find that full balance. 2 things with that. Again, a question to ask yourself is, what do I consider to be full balance? What does balance look like to me? Because oftentimes we think of balance as everything has to be either proportional or getting every single thing on our to-do list done in one day. Balance, in my mind, is an overall experience, an overall balance. So that maybe on Monday, you don't meditate or you don't work out because you had other things that took priority. But then on Tuesday, maybe you do meditate or work out, and there's something from Monday that you don't do then because you've allowed time to meditate or work out or spend time with the kids, whatever it might be. And so I would encourage you to find your own definition of what balance looks like and try to expand that broader than maybe just the day. And always, always the second thing is, I came up this morning with this cheesy little quote, when in doubt, wing it out. And by that, I mean, come back to the two wings of mindfulness. Always. If you take nothing else from this class, always, always come back to awareness and compassion. So when you're at home and you're not feeling balanced or things are coming up, you're feeling overworked and stressed and triggered, all of that. Bring awareness and then compassion, and especially as we'll talk about today, compassion to yourself. Let's see. Got that one. Finding some exercises to use in pressure moments. That's, again, I think the wait, the stop, and the 2 feet, 1 breath technique. And the last question, which actually segues beautifully into today, is how to achieve more resilience, which I think is what Ashley was talking with y'all about at the beginning of the call. And this goes straight into compassion, because compassion, as we will talk about, is what truly allows you to cultivate that resilience. All right, so thank you, by the way, for all those amazing questions. And if there's any follow-up that you would like to any of those, we'll turn to those at the end today. But let's go ahead and move into our grounding practice today. So hopefully you are in a position, spot, wherever that might be, that's comfortable for you. And let's just take a few moments to connect in here together. Let's all take a deep breath in together, closing down the eyes. In through the nose, filling up the belly and the abdomen, and exhaling forcefully with a sigh. Feeling yourself dropping in here today to wherever you are, seated, standing, lying down. Feeling gravity inviting you to drop in. Sensing the connection points between the body and whatever surface you're on. Maybe sensing your feet flat on the floor, the legs and glutes on a chair, the back tall, open in the chest, and also relaxed, allowing the breath to flow in and out. And if it's comfortable, maybe shrugging the shoulders, doing a couple shoulder rolls, or stretching the neck from side to side if that's comfortable for you. Noticing where you are, the temperature in the room, any sounds that you hear. And checking in with the body. How are you feeling today? And that could be a number of things, or it could be one overarching thing. Connecting in, going inward, asking, how am I feeling today? And however you're feeling today, allowing for that to be there. Connecting and trusting the flow of the breath to bring you into the present moment. And for this time we have together, allowing yourself to just be here, to share this space with everyone, to give yourself this gift of time and presence, connecting to the breath whenever you notice yourself wanting to be distracted or lost in thought, remembering that you can always come back to the breath. Taking another long inhale through the nose, filling up the belly, reaching all the way into the belly, pausing for a moment, and then exhaling gently and slowly through the mouth, inviting any tension that wants to go to release. Remembering the breath is always there for you. And gently blinking your eyes open, noticing the light as you fully open your eyes, and still aware that you are here, connected to the breath. There's a story that is next to the upstream downstream short story that I shared at the very beginning. Probably one of my favorite stories, and this one is actually true. And as I've said, this mindfulness course is secular, and the story is about a golden Buddha, but its application is for everyone. So during the 1930s, there was a temple in Bangkok, Thailand, and it had this statue of a Buddha that was made out of clay or mud. And the temple was eventually abandoned, and so they wanted to move the statue someplace else. So they moved it to another location in Bangkok, and it sat outside relatively unprotected until about the 1950s, when they decided that they were going to move the statue someplace else. And the statue was about 9 feet tall and weighed about 5.5 tons. So the movers attached ropes, fixed ropes and pulleys, I don't know what else, to try to move it. And when they tried to move it, one of the ropes broke and it fell and it cracked in a lot of places. And so they started looking in the cracks and kind of peeling back some of that mud and chipping it away. And what they discovered is that underneath those layers of mud was an 18-karat gold Buddha statue. And not only that, but it had instructions for how it was cast into 9 parts with a key to how to disassemble and assemble it again. And so they were amazed. And what experts believe is actually that this golden Buddha was made in maybe the 13th or 14th century and was probably covered in clay to disguise it from the Burmese invaders in the 1700s. And it worked because the village where this statue may have been was completely destroyed, but the invaders left it alone because it was relatively unattractive, just a clay Buddha that they didn't pay any attention to. And this statue is now located at the Temple of the Golden Buddha in Bangkok. And the photo that you see here is that statue. What I love so much about this story is that over generations, the knowledge of the core of that Buddha statue had been forgotten. Families, generations over the centuries had gone by without knowing that there was this golden Buddha underneath all of these layers of clay and mud, and they weren't aware of that precious gold underneath. And that provides such a powerful metaphor for us as humans. Because what we have done from basically the minute we came onto the scene is become covered in layers of mud and clay that have covered up our true nature, our golden, precious nature underneath. And so to remember that underneath all of those protective layers that we have put on to protect ourselves from other people, from society, from judgments, from harm, underneath all of that, we are this beautiful, precious gold being. And so mindfulness is there to help us peel back some of those layers. I think I mentioned a couple of talks ago about one of my meditation teachers, Sebani Selassie, who mentioned that we have over our lives dismembered ourselves. And mindfulness is a way to remember, to actually remember our true nature and coming home to that true nature. So it's a nice story, right? But how do we actually know that our true nature is kindness and compassion? Well, science, hallelujah for science. And I want to start with like the original, I don't want to say the original, but the scientist who kind of gets very much mischaracterized in terms of the notion of competition versus cooperation, or survival of the fittest versus compassion. And it's Darwin. I mean, we hear this all the time that Darwin said survival of the fittest. But actually, in writing Descent of Man, which is his most famous writing, Darwin actually mentioned survival of the fittest twice. And he mentions love 92 times. He mentions selfishness 12 times and moral sensitivity 92 times also. And he mentions competition 9 times and mutuality or mutuality of aid for others 24 times. So basically 23 times he mentions notions like survival of the fittest, competition, but 208 times Darwin mentions love, moral sensitivity, mutuality. And yet he's credited all the time with this notion of survival of the fittest that we have clung on to and took it 10 miles for even further. So we've forgotten, as Darwin said, that sympathy is our strongest instinct. Modern science is showing more and more how we are hardwired for compassion and for love. And we'll be talking today about both compassion for others and compassion for ourselves. So there's some amazing work being done by Dacher Keltner, and he's at the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. And what he is seeing is that when we show compassion for others, there are actual neurological, physiological benefits to us. For example, there's this carryover effect. So when we extend compassion to somebody else, it counteracts that negativity bias that I talked about 1 or 2 talks ago, that tendency to always want to scan for danger. Because when we actually extend compassion, it can basically tell that negativity bias, it's okay, calm down, you can stand down a little bit. And we can, again, train the brain to glean more positivity from the world. Remember that neuroscientist Rick Hansen said that our brains are like Velcro for negative and Teflon for the positive. But by extending compassion, we can start to build more Teflon, or excuse me, more Velcro for the positive too, and not just the negative. And what Keltner's also found is that there is this warm glow that our pleasure circuits in the brain are actually activated when we give to other people. That's why it feels good. That's why it feels good to do something nice. It actually lights up your brain. And then there's the vagus nerve, which is this bundle of nerves that kind of run from the top of the spine all the way down to the bottom. And that vagus nerve gets activated with feelings of warmth and caretaking, that mammalian caregiver brain, when we act out of compassion. As to self-compassion, we sort of need to start with what happens to us when we are not giving compassion to ourselves, when we are judging ourselves and criticizing ourselves. When we do that, it's no different. It registers no differently in our brain and in our nervous system than when somebody else is attacking us. Our brain doesn't know the difference. So when we're criticizing and judging ourselves and beating ourselves up, we are activating that reptilian brain, that fight, flight, or freeze. And again, that releases a lot of adrenaline, cortisol. It's a very insustainable type of energy. It's meant to only be for specific things, to run away from danger. And yet when we criticize ourselves, we're kicking that reptilian brain into high gear, just as if somebody else was attacking us. So we perceive some kind of threat, and it puts stress on the mind and the body and creates chronic stress, anxiety, and depression. And what we're doing then is being both the attacker and the victim. So the science on self-compassion is really led by doctors Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer. Kristen Neff has a wonderful website that I'll try to remember to send to Ashley that she can pass along to all of you with some incredible information, beautiful guided meditations. And what they have seen is that there are over 1,200 studies on self-compassion just since 2003. And self-compassion activates that mammalian brain, as I talked about, that warm glow. So that mammalian caregiver system, remember, that's what down regulates that fight, flight, or freeze. That's what gets us into that healing, restorative state. And that's when we can release oxytocin and endorphins, which help reduce our stress. So when we're talking about working with compassion for others and for ourselves, we're really talking about activating that mammalian brain more so that we can restore and heal and remember our true nature, which is that compassionate part of us. And so we really have to be ready to start to peel back those layers of mud for ourselves, and seeing that other people have those layers of mud too. And underneath it all, every human being has that true nature within them. So we are wired for this compassion, this kind of friendliness for ourselves and each other. And yet it's so hard. It's so hard, especially when we're triggered. And it's helpful to remember that this is a revolving door of compassion and self-compassion. They work together. And I love, this is probably my favorite Far Side cartoon because, first of all, it's so me. I'm that gifted kid who'd be pushing on the door instead of pulling it. But we can't fully and completely open the door to compassion for other people if we leave the door for compassion to ourselves closed. It just doesn't work that way. So I want folks to really let that sink in, because sometimes people are so great at extending compassion for other people, and it's also not the fullest compassion that you are capable of if you aren't also extending that compassion to yourself, because it is that revolving door, and one allows the other to continue to grow. And as always, it comes back to that second wing. As I said, when in doubt, wing it out. So when you are being triggered by a situation or someone else, you're likely aware of that trigger. And so now let's bring in the second wing of compassion, either to that person or situation or to yourself, that non-judgmental wing of mindfulness. So let's understand a little bit more about what compassion is, because there are also some misconceptions and confusion between compassion and pity and empathy. Compassion, you'll also hear called in the mindfulness world sometimes loving kindness or kindfulness. Pick a word that works for you. If you don't like any of those, just say kindness. It's important to know whatever word you pick to make it different from pity, for example. Pity is just feeling sorry for somebody. Empathy is when we can actually relate to what somebody is feeling. So this is what I talked about earlier in having more mindful communication, and as the listener, cultivating that empathy. Because if you can find an empathetic point of connection between you and whomever is speaking, then the barriers to communication can start coming down. So a lot of us think of ourselves as very empathetic people, and we probably have a lot of empathy that a lot of times we may confuse with compassion. The distinction between compassion and empathy is that compassion is having empathy and taking action. So for example, if you see a person on the street who's asking for money or doesn't have a home or needs clothing, whatever it is, you might see them and walk on by and maybe feel pity for them, feel sorry. You might actually have some empathy because maybe you can relate to a time in your life when you've had financial difficulty. So you might actually be able to relate to what that person is feeling. And then compassion is if you have that empathy and you go over to the person and maybe just talk to them. Maybe see if they'd like a hot meal or some money, or just the recognition that they're a human being too. So that's the distinction that is important to keep in mind. And just to point too quickly on compassion fatigue, because I think I heard something along these lines when I first hopped on the call today. Compassion fatigue, especially for people when you're in caregiving roles, whether that's a mom, you're volunteering at a shelter, you're a teacher, a doctor, whatever it might be, we're hearing a lot more about compassion fatigue. And in my experience, and in what I have been learning, the fatigue part of it comes in because we're not extending the compassion to ourselves. So we're getting fatigued because we're giving so much empathy and action to other people, so much compassion to other people, and never making the U-turn back to ourselves to give ourselves some empathy and maybe nurturing or whatever might bring us comfort. That's really where the compassion fatigue comes into play. So let's talk about the benefits of compassion before we get into some of the barriers. And of course, as I promised, one of the benefits of compassion is building resilience. What studies are showing is that people who have the strongest compassion practice are better able to get through life's ups and downs. It's a powerful practice that can change how we respond to difficult situations over time. Because if you're extending compassion when you're having an argument with somebody, and you extend compassion to them and yourself, how much better do you think you're going to be able to rebound from that conversation? As opposed to coming back from that conversation and really cussing the person out, being really angry at them, wishing you'd said something different, wishing you hadn't said something. That isn't resilience. Resilience comes in when you have extended full compassion to them and yourself, and you're able to walk away from the conversation and let it go. So this compassion really cultivates this capacity of us to be able to have more resilience for so many situations in life. Another benefit is that it's a good reminder, as I mentioned, that we all, no matter how much you dislike somebody, no matter what awful thing you perceive them to be doing, we all have that true golden nature. And so compassion is really an invitation to remind us that everybody wants to be free from suffering. At some level, everybody wants that same basic thing. And as Maya Angelou said, I long, as does every human being, to be at home wherever I find myself. And isn't that what you want? Isn't that what your enemies want? So remembering that can help create that connection and, again, build resilience. Because when you're remembering that's what we all want, it can help to maybe not take things so personally, which is very difficult, especially when it's when what you are experiencing is something violent, something traumatic. It's so hard. Of course, that feels personal. And yet, in that situation, even extending yourself compassion, even if it's hard, and we'll talk about this, even if it's hard to extend compassion for the other person because they've done something traumatic to you, extending compassion to yourself for whatever you need will help you build that resilience. And remember that we're all just trying to be at home wherever we find ourselves. And the third benefit, and these are not all, I just picked some of the good ones, the really good ones. The third benefit is that by practicing compassion, we can really counteract the loneliness and separation that comes when we don't feel connected to ourselves or other people, which is pretty much the case nowadays. In the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a lot of political discord, in the middle of a racial awakening, many people feel more disconnected than ever. And yet, when we can practice compassion, we can start to break down that illusion of disconnection. Albert Einstein said, our separation from each other is an optical illusion of consciousness. It's that dismembering from ourselves and from other people. With all of those benefits, there are still understandable barriers to compassion for others. We'll take that one first. And the biggest barrier is that oftentimes people will feel that it's very contrived or phony, that it's just think positive and send out love. It's much deeper than that, and you don't have to force it. Cultivating compassion starts with just planting a seed to want to feel more compassion, even in the moments that you don't. Because, of course, it's a practice. You are not going to wake up tomorrow and love the person who's hurt you or wronged you, or be able to extend them compassion. But you can wake up and say, I really want to try. And then maybe the next day you say, I want to try a little bit more. So it's a practice. Many people think that showing compassion shows weakness, especially the people who are all about survival of the fittest, competition. It's actually quite the opposite. People who really react from a place of force and judgment and instilling fear and lack of compassion, they may get some stuff done, but they're not the people who really make lasting, effective change or who are respected. They don't build bridges. When you look at all the great spiritual leaders over time, they're the ones who built bridges through compassion, through their own resilience. And Martin Luther King Jr. is a fantastic example of this. Any of the civil rights leaders, John Lewis, Malcolm X, anybody, yes, even Malcolm X, with what he faced, he was still very resilient. Martin Luther King, very resilient with what he faced. John Lewis, with the beatings that he took and what he faced, very resilient. And it started with that compassion for self first, and then cultivating compassion for others. And that, in my opinion, is not weakness. That is the definition of strength. And as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, never succumb to the temptation of becoming bitter. As you press for justice, be sure to move with dignity and discipline, using only the power and weapons of love. When it comes to self-compassion, there are other barriers too. The first is that it's just so much easier to criticize and beat up ourselves than it is to extend ourselves some compassion. So if this is the case for you, the invitation is to recognize that barrier in yourself and do a really gentle compassion practice to avoid what we call backdraft. So when a house is on fire and it's really hot inside, firefighters don't just bust in, break down the door, because it could cause this explosion, this backdraft. So when you have been in a place most of your life of constant self-criticism and self-judgment, you've essentially put walls up around your heart, around that fire. And if you try and just go right in and extend yourself some compassion, there could be a little bit of a backdraft, some discomfort, some disorientation. And so, like firefighters, they go in and they poke holes around the house to let the fire breathe, let some air out a little bit at a time. So for you, you can begin this by just, again, setting an intention, kind of poke a little hole in that wall around your heart to let some air out. Set an intention to want to feel compassion for yourself. And then slowly, with your practice, start to come in, poke a few more holes. And maybe one day, oh, I feel a little bit of love toward myself, but oh, that's too uncomfortable. So back off. And that backing off in and of itself is an act of self-compassion, recognizing that it's too much. That's okay. Come back to it another time. Other barriers to self-compassion are that people think it is going to lead to self-indulgence, selfishness, weakness, laziness. And the studies all show the complete opposite. In fact, again, those over 1,200 studies I mentioned show that self-compassion does not create self-pity, self-indulgence, laziness, or weakness. Again, it creates more resilience. And in fact, self-compassion actually allows you to ruminate less. People who have a self-compassion practice are less self-focused and they're more giving and present in their relationships. They also tend to be more motivated and persistent and have more strength and resilience and actually better coping abilities when you have that self-compassion practice. So, with all of that, how do we actually practice compassion, self-compassion? We'll just call it mindful compassion. And this is a little bit different, or kind of a next level type of mindfulness from what we've been doing, because it's, of course, connecting to the body first and foremost to see what's coming up for you today. If there's a situation that's triggering you, or maybe you're just at a low grade kind of meh all the time, just connecting to the body and seeing what's coming up for you. And thinking about, and we'll work on this, I'll show you how this works, thinking about bringing to mind a situation or a person where you feel compassion, and noticing, where do you feel compassion in the body? Is that in the heart, the chest, the abdomen? And then turning your awareness to different types of people. We usually start either with ourselves or somebody who we know loves us, really feels a lot of compassion for us, even our pets. And when we're doing a compassion practice for others, which is also called a metta, M-E-T-T-A practice, you'll see that referenced sometimes. When we're working on the practice of extending compassion to other people, we offer certain phrases to them, and I'll go over what those are. But we start with an easy entry point. So it's somebody who we know really loves us, shows us a lot of compassion, like our dog or a loved one, and offering them phrases of compassion. And then we kind of work our way up, offering those phrases to somebody who's kind of neutral, that we maybe see once in a while but don't feel a particular way about. And then to a person with whom we have a difficulty. And then to ourselves. And then we offer that compassion out to the entire world. So the compassion phrases, again, find what works for you. The ones I'll use today are ones of, may you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be happy. May you live a life of ease. And those are what we kind of repeat. But you can pick whatever phrases work for you. You might just want to say, I wish you safety, health, happiness, ease, etc. So I'll give you an opportunity during that practice to sort of find what works for you. And it's important to remember that these compassion phrases are not affirmations. So affirmations are really phrases that are a wish for something for yourself. I am wealthy, I am healthy, whatever it might be. I am happy, or I am. Those are affirmations that are really kind of this wish for yourself. Compassion phrases are this wish and intention for something that's universally desirable for all beings. So again, all beings want to be safe. All beings want to be healthy. All beings want to be happy. And all beings want to live a life of ease. Not all beings necessarily want to be wealthy. Some people don't care about that. So that's the difference between the compassion phrases and affirmations. So with that, I think we're sort of right on schedule. We will practice. I'll give you all just a moment or two to kind of get situated, and then we'll begin our compassion practice. All right, let's begin. Allowing yourself to settle in once again. Noticing what might be coming up for you after listening to this talk. And for the next few moments, allowing that to be here. Dropping in, noticing the connection between the body and wherever you're sitting or lying down or standing. Closing down your eyes if that's comfortable for you, or casting your gaze downward. And connecting, noticing the breath by taking a gentle inhale through the nose, allowing the breath to fill the chest, abdomen, holding it for just a moment, and then releasing slowly and gently through the mouth, inviting the body to relax and settle in. Again, inhaling through the nose, maybe a slightly deeper breath this time, imagining the breath reaching out into the entire body, holding for a moment, and releasing gently and slowly through the mouth, maybe with a sigh, inviting any tension to release where it can. And one last time, making this your deepest breath yet today. Inhaling through the nose, feeling the air, the back of the throat, the rise of the chest and abdomen, reaching to all corners of the body, and holding for a moment. And exhaling, fully releasing the breath. And allowing the breath to return to normal without trying to control it. Seeing where you can notice the breath the most. Maybe that's at the tip of the nose or the back of the throat, or the rise and fall of the chest or abdomen. Taking a moment to connect into this place that can be your anchor, where you can return to at any time. We'll be practicing compassion for others today. And so if any time you start to feel any discomfort, know that you can back out of the practice and return to the connection of the breath. resting in the inflow and outflow of your breath. And remembering that Albert Einstein talked about this optical illusion of consciousness, where we've created separation from ourselves and from other people. And we can begin to cultivate this compassion, kindfulness, friendliness toward other people and ourselves, so that we can remember this connection that we all have to our true nature. So, the phrases I'll be using to extend that compassion are ones that you can take for yourself or find something else that resonates with you more, something that invites you, allows you to feel the warmth of compassion. And the phrases I'll be using are: may you be safe, may you be at peace, may you be healthy, may you live a life of ease. So you may want to say instead, I wish you safety, or I wish you peace, I wish you health, I wish you a life of ease. But a phrase that helps you connect with that intention to cultivate compassion. And we'll begin by bringing to mind a person or even a being or pet, someone from whom you feel love and compassion. And taking some time to reflect on that person or being or pet's qualities, how they radiate compassion to you, what they're like, what their words are like, their presence. And noticing, where do you feel that compassion from them in your body? Where does that sense of compassion rise for you in the body? And what does that feel like? Is there a warmth or tingling or openness? Sensing into what it feels like in the body to feel compassion. And now, keeping that person or being in mind, offering them your phrases of compassion. And so, repeating after me, mentally, softly to yourself: may you be safe. May you be at peace. May you be healthy. May you live a life of ease. Imagining this person or being or pet receiving that compassion from you. Imagining what it might be like for them to receive that. And now widening your awareness to a neutral person. Someone that you might see from time to time but don't have any particularly strong feelings about. Maybe someone you see on the street or somebody in your office building, a clerk at the grocery store. Taking a moment to bring this person to mind and what they look like, sound like, act like. Reminding yourself that this person, just like you, wants to be free from suffering. That this person, just like you, as Maya Angelou said, wants to feel at home wherever they find themselves. And now offering to this neutral person the phrases of compassion. May you be safe. May you be at peace. May you be healthy. May you live a life of ease. And imagining this person receiving that gesture of compassion from you and what it might be like for them. And now bringing to mind a person with whom you have a difficult relationship. Not someone that there's a lot of trauma around, someone that you just have more difficulty with. Maybe it's a coworker, or family member, or friend. Bringing this person to mind. Turning your attention to the image of this person and inviting yourself to see past their layers of mud and clay that have covered up their true nature. Or even setting an intention to want to see past those layers. And if that's difficult for you, it may help to think of the person as a baby or someone very old who might be suffering or dying, to see this person in a more vulnerable state. And then see if you can look beyond the layers of clay and mud that they've piled over their true nature. And remembering that this person, just like you, wants to be happy and free from suffering. The Archbishop Desmond Tutu said that when we see others as the enemy, we risk becoming what we hate. When we oppress others, we end up oppressing ourselves. All of our humanity is dependent upon recognizing the humanity in others. And so holding the image of that difficult person in mind and offering that person your phrases of compassion. May you be safe. May you be at peace. May you be healthy. May you live a life of ease. Now imagining bringing all of these people together. The neutral person or being your pet. The person or being your pet from whom you feel love and compassion. And the difficult person. Bringing them all together with you and offering all of you together these phrases of compassion. May we all be safe. May we all be at peace. May we all be healthy. May we all live a life of ease. Noticing how you're feeling, where you're feeling it in the body, if anything. And now turning that compassion toward yourself, recognizing your intention to have compassion for others, and now bringing that compassion inward, extending phrases of compassion to yourself. May I be safe. May I be at peace. May I be healthy. May I live a life of ease. Now imagine this compassion in you, filling you up like a warm golden light, extending to every part of the body and reaching out of the top of your head, the tips of your fingers and the tips of your toes, and extending out into the world around you. Imagining this compassion reaching all the way to the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea, extending all the way around the world to people who are suffering or sick or dying, extending this compassion to the young and the old, to people who are hungry, at war, lost, or disconnected, to all the trees and the grasses and the flowers, to the mountains and the oceans, imagining this compassion from you is never ending and it can reach out and up and beyond to all beings, all creatures, and the world. And whispering the phrases, may all beings be safe. May all beings be at peace. May all beings be healthy. May all beings live a life of ease. And allowing this compassion practice to wash over you, noticing whatever is coming up for you and allowing it to be there. As Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. So remembering that boundless compassion that you have for yourself and others, the connection that we all have to our true golden nature. Inviting some gentle movement back into the body. Maybe wiggling the fingers or toes, giving yourself a gentle stretch. Lengthening the inhale and exhale a bit to allow the body to come fully back into the present moment. And when you're ready, gently blinking your eyes open. Just noticing what you notice about yourself, about your surroundings, and about this practice. There's a poem I'd like to share by Ella Wheeler Wilcox that I say every day after my morning meditation to remind me of this connection. And it's called my morning prayer. Let me today do something that will take a little sadness from the world's vast store. And may I be so favored as to make of joy's too scanty sum a little more. Let me not hurt by any selfish deed or thoughtless word the heart of foe or friend. Nor would I pass unseeing worthy need, or sin by silence when I should defend. However meager be my worldly wealth, let me give something that will aid my kind, a word of courage or a thought of health, dropped as I pass for troubled hearts to find. Let me tonight look back across the span twixt dawn and dark, and to my conscience say, because of some good act to beast or man, the world is better that I lived today. Before we move into the question and answer period, just a couple of things. First of all, please keep in touch with me after this. I really have loved hearing from some of you, and I would like to watch your journeys, to answer any questions that you have as you continue down your mindfulness practice. And so here in the PDF, which I think you should be able to click on the links when Ashley sends you the PDF, you can find me on all the socials, my website link. And if you'd like to be on my email list so that you can get notified of future courses that I have coming up, you can just send me in the subject line subscribe to my email address below, and I will put you on the email list. And I pass along this quote also from Edward Abbey, which is one of my favorites. May your trails be crooked, winding, lonesome, dangerous, leading to the most amazing view. May your mountains rise into and above the clouds. And that's certainly what I hope for all of you. And also a request for an act of kindness. If you could also fill out the survey that Ashley will be sending around afterwards. For two reasons. It provides me very useful feedback. So I really want your honest feedback, because it helps me be able to turn this course into something even more powerful, or make tweaks where I need to, or add something or take something out, whatever I need to do. It's helpful for future people who may receive this course. And the second reason is that I submit the survey results and feedback to my mindful meditation school so that they can see that how I'm doing as a mindfulness teacher. So they request that I get that feedback too. So I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Ashley to see what questions folks have coming up in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. Looks like we already have a question coming out. Donnell wants to know, how do I train myself to walk away?
I'm wanting a little more clarity around that question, Donnell. Walking away from what and who specifically? If you could give me some clarity around that, because there's a couple different directions that answer could go. So I'd be curious what you mean by that. So tell me more, please.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, Donnell, if it's maybe in reference to, you were talking about when you don't ruminate on things and you don't let other people get to you, kind of like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. How do you walk away from that? How do you not let it get to you?
Yeah, and Donnell, if you want to come on video too and elaborate, we welcome that.
In the meantime, we got another question. What do you do when others who have extended an act of compassion to you suddenly makes you feel guilty for accepting it by saying, "You owe me, remember when I..."
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And so the question is, how do you respond when somebody does that? The first thing that comes to mind for me is from a place of compassion, because it would seem to me, if someone has done something kind for you and they expect something in return, that oftentimes, in my experience, means that person is feeling not seen, not heard, not good enough, wanting something to make up for some lack that they are feeling. Because if the act of doing the kindness was enough, that person wouldn't expect anything in return to also help them to feel better. And so it's likely that that person, I'm imagining, is asking for a favor in return because they're feeling some kind of lack about something, or whatever it might be, lack emotionally, lack financially, whatever it might be. So they want something in return. And so, first of all, that's not about you, that's about them. And so I'll throw up another acronym that Ashley and I know. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but QTIP, quit taking it personally. I love that. So QTIP it, don't take it personally. And then also extend compassion to that person and to yourself, because you may be feeling pressure or guilty, I think, as you said, for maybe I should do something or whatever it might be. But taking a moment, sitting and asking, what is the act I can take from a compassionate place for this person and myself? And sometimes, truly, the most compassionate thing that we can do for ourselves and for somebody else is to let that person go and send them on their path and release them with compassion and love, not with anger or judgment or resentment, but to say, I understand you may be expecting something in return for this. I understand that there may be something underneath that. And for yourself, you may decide that you can let that person go. I'm not sure of the particular circumstances. Maybe that person is in your house and you can't let them go. That's understandable. But taking that time, that moment to ask yourself, what is the compassionate act for myself and for this other person, and act from that space. And again, kind of going behind what they're actually asking from you and seeing what's underneath that. Let me know if that doesn't land for you, Donnell, or if there's something more to that.
We have another one here. I really struggle with the fine line between compassion and enabling. In a difficult relationship with a family member, I fear that compassion turns into enabling their bad choices and behavior.
Very, very common. Very common. And it is a fine line. And the question I will ask for you in that situation is, you are giving compassion for yourself, for the other person, excuse me. Where is the compassion for yourself? Because when that sort of codependent situation comes up, the person who is extending the compassion, who's in that codependency space, there's a boundary issue. And that boundary issue is indicative of not having enough compassion for what is appropriate and nurturing and caring for yourself. So when you find yourselves in those situations, which is, again, very normal, and compassion and codependency, very fine line between the two, and often what's missing from that person who's in that codependency space is that compassion for themselves by setting some appropriate boundaries. And so asking yourself, if I'm in this kind of codependent relationship and I'm giving all my compassion to this person, doing everything for them, asking yourselves, what are some boundaries I can set that will allow me to extend compassion to myself, to respect and love and honor myself too. Thanks, Ashley. That's a beautiful question.
And I think it really plays into the following question about is setting boundaries in relationships also considered self-compassion?
Absolutely. Yes, very insightful, and absolutely. Because, and this kind of goes back to the compassion fatigue piece of it. When you have appropriate boundaries, then you're not giving it all away for free. You're holding on to some of it for yourself, because you can't keep putting, like, a car can't keep running on gas without putting more gas in. So you got to put some gas back in your tank with a boundary, with self-compassion, because otherwise you burn out. And I will give the example of my mother with this that I think I mentioned in the first session. My mom, most compassionate, caring, giving person in the world, always doing for others, never taking care of herself, never taking time out for herself, never doing anything nice for herself, staying up too late, working too hard, overeating as a consequence, getting in financial debt as a consequence, all because on the inside she was really depressed, really sad, and really not able to give herself compassion. And what happened is that all of that led to her having a heart attack when she was 58, alone in her office just past midnight one night, and she died. And I believe it would have not been the case if she had been able to give herself some compassion and care and boundaries. So yes, boundaries and self-compassion go hand in hand.
Leo kind of added to this that compassion is not an agreement, it's action and acknowledgement. You're compassionate by validating their feelings, even if only in your head, and responding from within rather than in retaliation, and not attaching to the negative. Harder said than done at times.
Yeah, harder said than done at times, because it's a practice. And we're human beings, we're not perfect. So all beautifully said, Leo. Absolutely. I really appreciate that huge insight. And remembering, and this comes back to the self-compassion, that when you act like a jerk or judge somebody or yell at somebody or yell at your kids or your colleague, not to beat yourself up afterwards, because you're a human being. So extend yourself some compassion by recognizing something was getting triggered for me in the moment. Next time I will take a pause, I will take a beat and respond differently, but I'm not going to beat myself up for it. I'm going to learn from it and know that there was something underneath me that was preventing me from acting from my true nature of compassion. And so, yeah, just easier said than done for sure. I appreciate that, Leo. Thank you.
Yeah, and Crystal shared, which I think is going to tie into some of Donnell's question and about walking away. She said, that is what has helped me walk away and let a person go. Identifying how I need to show myself compassion. It's been so powerful. It's the first time I feel I can hear my heart and voice in its most authentic self.
Yeah, very beautiful, Crystal. Thank you. Donnell, did we get any more clarity from you on your question? I really want to answer it. If not, I'll try and answer it from the best of my understanding.
Yeah, he did mention it's part of that, the Martin Luther King quote and that piece of it. How do you walk away in very instigating situations like that, and to keep your resiliency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, this is the work, right? This is so the work, especially nowadays, with all of the very polarizing, emotionally charged situations that there are out there when it comes to politics, race issues, immigration issues, you name it. And I think back to and just so appreciated recently the teachings of the student. I always, it's the SNCC Center in the Civil Rights Movement. I always, the Southern something nonviolent, the Nonviolent Student Committee that was so involved with the Civil Rights Movement, and how they trained themselves for nonviolence, and how they took so much torture and beating and abuse and imprisonment and fire hoses and never responded. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. Never responded from a place of violence. So, how do you do that? It's practice. And I believe that they came from such a place of integrity with that golden nature that even their oppressors, even the people who were abusing them, imprisoning them, torturing them, that even they were their fellow human beings, their fellow brothers and sisters. And so, how could they act from a place of violence or hatred toward them? And so that's, I mean, that's some deep, deep, beautiful work when you can be in the throes of that kind of violence and hatred and still come from a place of love and compassion and nonviolence. Um, so, Donnell, to answer your question about walking away, it is work. I mean, it's not, again, something, if this isn't a practice and training and cultivation that you've been engaged in, don't expect yourself to just turn away when something happens. If you really have the intention to want to be able to walk away, keep cultivating that practice. Keep tapping into that compassionate center so that when you are in a moment where you have the choice to either engage or walk away, or maybe stay and even engage from a more compassionate place, that you've created the awareness within yourself to be able to more consciously choose what you want your reaction to be. So I hope that helped. Thank you. That's just such a powerful question and so timely, truly, with everything going on. So thank you for that. Ashley, too, is there a way for you to download? There's a lot of comments that I'm not going to be able to read or see through. Is there a way for you to download the chat to send it to me afterwards too?
Yes. Yeah, I'll make sure that I get that to you.
Thank you.
Just a couple more came in. We had, is compassion supposed to make you cry, or am I doing it wrong? I'm very empathetic or empathic. And when I do compassion meditation, I get intensely emotional, both when extending compassion to others as well as self. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
I don't understand how to exercise self-compassion without also feeling emotionally drained.
Yeah. So understandable. And of course you're going to feel emotionally drained because this is energy. You're moving energy. And that's no joke. This peeling back of the layers requires energy. And so you're going to be exhausted. And I'm curious about your judgment of or relationship to the crying. I think it sounds beautiful because it's bringing up something in you so deep and so touching. Rumi has a beautiful quote. I love Rumi. Keep your gaze on the bandaged place. That's where the light comes in. And so that wherever those tears are coming from, they're coming out and they're letting light in. And I think that's beautiful. And yes, it's exhausting. So how could you extend yourself some more care? There's the compassion practice, and then oftentimes, as we talk about with the rain practice, the nurturing. and sort of that after the rain, there can be after the compassion practice, because you might be really freaking exhausted, and that's okay. So how can you nurture yourself? How can you fill that tank up a little bit? Maybe you need to take a nap, maybe read a book, go for a walk, something to restore yourself and heal yourself a little bit, and let those tears flow. There's nothing wrong with tears. Tears are beautiful. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
Yeah, Crystal just chime in and absolutely beautiful. It's also brave to allow yourself to feel that deeply.
Absolutely.
One more question. So kind of a combo here. We have one just sharing some condolences for your mother. And then another.
Thank you for that.
I lost an aunt who was like a second mom at 59 in a similar way. She possessed so many of the same traits of your mom. I'm trying to learn from her and honor her by acknowledging the very steep price she paid for being a caretaker of everyone else but herself. I'm not sure if I have the balance right yet or ever will, but I'm certainly going to keep trying.
And that's the important, beautiful piece of that, is you have that intention and you're willing to try. And every day you can get up and try again. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry about your aunt as well. But what a beautiful way to honor her, by trying to learn from her and continue that journey for yourself.
And Carla just saying, I've identified those individuals who deplete me physically, mentally, and emotionally and spiritually. And I learned that I need to extend variations of compassion.
That's great. A great way to develop your practice. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to go 100 yards with compassion right out the gate. You might just go a yard, and that's awesome. So yeah, again, releasing sort of the judgments or expectations on how you're supposed to do compassion. Just set the intention and just just freaking do it. That's all I have to say. Just do it. Just try it and see what happens, and let go of any expectations of what's supposed to happen. Yeah.
Chris wants to know, where do I go to sign up for new courses?
Send me an email with subscribe in the subject line. The email is on the PDF, but it's Michele with one L, Michele at lifefromthesummit.com. But you have all the links and everything in the PDF where you can find me. And I'm pretty sure Ashley and I will be putting our little heads together to think of the next level mindfulness course that we can do probably after the new year sometime.
Yeah. And now just coming in, everybody, just thank you. So insightful, wonderful course. Yeah, everyone's just very pleased and grateful, and thank you to you for all the work that you put into this and just the amazing content and facilitation that you brought. Like, that was second to none, that's for sure.
Well, Ashley, I really want to thank you for that, first of all. And I really want to shout out to you, because this would not have happened without you. And the fact that you were able to put together such an amazing group of people is just says a lot about how you show up for your people at Pikes Peak and throughout the community college community. So I really appreciate you, and also again Lakeisha for facilitating while you were gone, but every day that you've been here early and facilitating and getting people involved, I really appreciate you. Yeah, and thank you so much, everyone. I am sending you all love, health, peace, and happiness, and also to please stay as safe and as well as you can during these times. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here with you all.
Hey, thank you, everyone. Just keep an eye out on your emails. I'll be sending the links to the recording and those final surveys and assessments. So please make sure to complete those. We would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, I really do appreciate that. Thank you. And there was something I mentioned. Oh, the Kristen Neff website. I'll try to remember to send that to you, that you can send out to folks too.
Okay.
All right, great. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week and be kind to yourself and to others.
We'll see you. Bye, everybody.
Hi.